Welcome to the podcast. I'm Michael Kushner, your host, and with me today is Senior Associate from my law firm, MBK Chapman, Sam Kill. Sam, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Today, I hope you had your coffee because we are going to be discussing one of the most important aspects of HOA life that also happens to be one of the most complex, misunderstood, and confusing aspects of HOA life, and that is the reserve fund and reserve studies. What are they? What's it for? How do I know what's going on? I don't know how to read it. All of that. We're going to cover it all. This is going to be a two-part episode. I wanted to fit it all in one, but there's no way I could do justice to the complexities of the topic and actually help you folks understand what it is you've got in front of you, whether it's the reserve summary that you get every year or a reserve study that's supposed to be done at least every 3 years. How do you look at those? What does it mean? What do these numbers mean? How do I know if my HOA is healthy or not financially? These are all things that you can find in the reserve study if you know how to look at it and you know what to look for. And so we're going to cover it all. And because of that, and because I didn't want to take a shortcut, we're going to do this in 2 episodes. Okay? So gear up. This is a little complex. I'm going to try to break it down in a very simple way. I'm with you, folks. This stuff makes my eyes glass over. I have a lot of trouble looking at just columns of numbers. I'm not a math guy. I'm not a numbers guy. That is a big deficit in my life. And so I am at the top of the list of people who simply, only because I've been so exposed to these for so many years, do I have any understanding what I'm looking at. If I didn't, I would look at it, say, this is too hard, and I would ignore it to my detriment. So for those of you out there who are like me, who are not accountants or used to seeing these kinds of just seeing financials and understanding how to read financials, this episode or these 2 episodes are absolutely for you. And I promise you, at the very least, when we're done, if you've paid attention, you'll have a broad understanding of what it is you've got in front of you and what to look for, some main things to look for to make a judgment call as to whether your HOA is financially healthy. That's the promise I can give you. All right, at the very least, I'll give you one place to look to determine the relative health of your HOA. So you're going to want to stick around for that. I'm hoping to get to that at the tail end of part 1. But it depends.
Very important. Like you said, very intimidating to a lot of people, a lot of technicalities to it. So hopefully we can be of assistance.
And I agree. So let's jump right in with what is a reserve fund? Okay. So in the context of a homeowners association, Sam, what is this reserve fund? What are we talking about? What's it for?
Sure.
Talk to me.
Basically, it's a legally mandated, legally required savings account for associations other than their maintenance account or operating account. That means this is specifically intended and earmarked to address repairs, restoration, and replacement of what's called major components.
Okay, what's a major component?
Well, a major component under Civil Code Section 5600 or 5550, pardon me, is anything such as shared roofs, elevators, could be tennis courts, stairways,
common areas.
balconies.
It sounds like you're talking about the common areas.
Common areas, amenities, could be a clubhouse, gym, pools.
Let's be more specific. Let's talk about the clubhouse and the gym. Let's start with the gym.
Sure.
It's not just the gym. It's all of the barbells,
right,
all of the benches, all of the weights, all of the machinery, the ones with the pulleys and the handles. Those are all line item aspects of what's in the gym, and those are all components. Okay, tennis courts. You've got the net. You've got whatever's in there, the lights.
Right.
Okay, you have the court itself. Those are, those courts have to be reslurried or repaved every so often, every few years. Right. The nets have to be replaced every so often. Those are all items. We're not going to get into it. We'd be here forever in 10 parts if we had to get into the minutia about all items that are, that have a life of under 30 years. We're not going to get into that, okay? What we're going to get into is just the basics. So what we're saying is this list of these major components are all the things that make up the common area that have to be replaced or repaired at some point, in time. If it's something that simply exists and never has to be looked at or maintained, then it wouldn't fall under the reserve. Fund. For lack of a better term, let's just be very broad. Right. That's what we're talking about. All of the things that require maintenance or replacement at some point. Even if If you live in an HOA that has its own roads, you have to, every few years, you have to slurry those.
Yeah.
Okay, get rid of all the cracks and everything. That slurry is going to be in, there'll be at least one line item dedicated to the slurry of the roads in your reserve study. The reserve fund is the bank account or bank accounts, depending, that houses that money, okay? Because the law requires the HOAs to maintain, we've talked about this before, one of their fundamental duties is to maintain, repair, replace common areas. Well, that costs money. Since the law requires HOAs to maintain, repair, and replace common area elements, it implicitly requires them to have the money to do it. Right. And that's the obligation to set aside that money. And that's how we get to where we get to, okay? So you mentioned Civil Code 5550, 5550, and that is correct. And it kind of defines what is a major component. It's a long statute.
It is.
It's wordy, and it has a good deal of information, but the long and the short of it is those are what major components are. And it's all the stuff we've been talking about, all the things that you can think of in your specific HOA. Some have much more than others because you have some HOAs, let's say really large multi-housing HOAs with a ton of amenities, golf course, tennis courts, pickleball courts, clubhouse. It's going to have a lot more.
Right.
Okay. Now, in addition, each component, each major component that you were talking about, has some vocabulary words associated with it that you need to understand. I'm just going to give you three, okay? These are three terms that come up in either reserve studies or in the statute itself that help you understand what you're looking at, okay? And the first one of those is useful life. We've talked very briefly about that in a few other episodes. A useful life is not a solid number, by the way, that is the same everywhere. I'll give you an example. Something that's made of wood, let's say. Let's say it's a balcony. A balcony in a dry place like Arizona would last longer, I would think, than in a place like Hawaii or Florida where it's much more humid and wood rot tends to grow faster. And so a useful life of that same component made out of the same materials would be different in a different location. So environment matters. What the useful life is how long is something supposed to last before it needs to be typically replaced, okay? Roofs, for example, are anywhere from 20 to 30 years, depending on what the roof's made of, okay? The useful life is 20 or 30 years. Now, once a useful life is set for a specific component in a specific geographic place, doesn't mean that it can't be changed. But it will be changed if it's done right only by an expert who's licensed and trained. They don't have to be licensed, but they typically are, okay? The ones that do the reserve studies, not board members, not qualified. That we're going to get into that later. That's when you see some real fraud issues, is when the board's changing useful life. But the experts can look at something. Let's say something has a useful life of 10 years. And at year 3, the expert looks at it to do their first reserve study and says, you know what, this thing hasn't even degraded at all. It's been maintained beautifully. And they can reassess its useful life for another 10 years. And then it would, instead of being on year 4, it would start at year 10 again. That can happen. And it doesn't mean it's bad if it was done by the right person under the right conditions, okay? But useful life is a number that just means what is the useful life of this specific line item? And that's really it. It's going to be a period of time where if everything goes as planned, it'll be time to get a new one, okay? A new roof, a new balcony, a new whatever, new tennis courts, new gates, new painting, doesn't matter, okay? The second thing you have to, so you have useful life. The second phrase or term is remaining life. Remaining life is a function of useful life. If a useful life is 10 years and you've gone 2 years, then the remaining life, assuming it hasn't been, useful life hasn't been rejiggered, the remaining life would be 8 years, right? It's a function of useful minus time.
Right.
That's very simple, okay? And basically how much time is left until you have to X, Y, Z. So if the useful life is renumbered or redone by the expert, then the remaining life will also be redone because that is a function of the
always trails,
And then the third one is current replacement cost. People can't see the future. You don't know what supplies are going to cost. If you looked at 2017, nobody could have predicted COVID. Okay?
True.
Well, COVID raised prices on everything, lumber, and other materials. Nobody would have predicted that. So if your time to replace something happened to occur during COVID, and you could get a contractor out there, it would have been a very different scenario in supplies and costs than was reasonably anticipated. So we're talking about present day, okay? So current replacement value is, okay, here's what we need to budget so that at the end of a useful life, when there are 0 remaining life left, and this thing has to be redone, what's it going to cost? Because that number, what you hope happens is, let's say it's 10 years, and let's say it's $10,000 with today, right? We say that in 10 years, we're going to have to spend 10 grand to replace that thing. Hopefully, you're setting aside $1,000 a year for that item in your reserve account so that at the end of 10 years, the 10,000 will be there. Now, it's possible that prices have gone up by the time we get there and that 10,000 might not be enough. And that's okay. That's not a result of any mismanagement or negligence. Right. It's just we don't tell the future. Nobody can. There's no crystal ball.
Right.
So I hope you guys understand, if you didn't, replay this part. Useful life, remaining life, and costs, okay? Or current replacement costs. Those are the terms that you need to understand. Now, the code requires, Davis-Sterling Act, how often does the code require an HOA to prepare a full-on reserve study of all the major components of their association?
Well, under 5550 that you mentioned and 5600, Civil Code Section 5600 to be precise, it requires it to be done every 3 years.
Okay.
Now, the study
And what if you only have 5 people, 5 homes in your HOA?
Makes no difference.
1,000 homes.
Regardless of the number or count, they're subject to that legally mandated every 3 years. Now, that being said, they have to provide a report annually. So
a summary reserve.
A summary has to be provided on an annual basis, regardless of whether you are renewing it annually. I mean, you're not supposed to. It's every 3 years.
Well, you can if you want, but it'd be a waste of money.
It would be.
It's expensive.
So you're basically using the same reserve study as a basis for the annual reports, but it nonetheless has to be provided on an
And this
annual
is very important because it's going to come into play shortly when we talk about this percent funded thing, which is probably one of the biggest gems you're going to get out of this entire 2-part series, is that percent funded and what that means to you as a member of an HOA, regardless of where you are in California. And so remember that summary. Okay, it's also on the main study as well, but it's on the summary every year. That summary, it's a few pages, not long. It's just a summary. That's what it is. But that all-important figure is going to be on there. You're going to look for it, and you're going to know what it means. So pay attention and remember that summary is very important, okay? So a well-managed property is reserving sufficient funds to cover all of the major components throughout its useful life and remaining time so that it can be fixed, repaired, replaced at the appropriate times, okay?
Exactly.
Now, let's give you some real life examples, okay? Let's say your HOA is a flat roof system that has, it's a 20 unit building, flat roof, which are terrible, by the way, for water purposes, but a lot of them have flat roofs, okay? And let's say the useful life of that roof is 25 years. And let's say that the replacement cost, as calculated today, to get the new roof when it's time, scrap that roof, put a new roof on, is $120,000. Okay, so you have a 25-year life on it's $120,000 replacement. Now let's pretend that the roof is 10 years old. Okay, so that means there's 15 more years of remaining life because the useful life was 25. 10 years has passed, so there's 15 years left of remaining life on this roof, such that $120,000 is going to be necessary to replace the roof in 15 years. And let's pretend for a minute that the HOA was doing their job, okay? Do the math with me on this. They would have to be putting aside $8,000 a year? Or is that just assuming they started now? I didn't actually... When I wrote the example, I didn't do the math.
So they should have some money set aside as part of the reserves already, 10 years into it.
I think it's...
But assuming they did not, let's say that you have a 15-year runway to do so, it would have to be $8,000 per year moving forward. Because that $8,000...
I think it's $8,000 a year. $8,000 a year is just shy of 10. So if you have 15 years left, that's $150,000. So yeah. So what it is in that scenario, the HOA wasn't setting aside money. But now a new board comes in. They say we've got 15 years left on this, and there's no money in our reserve account for this line item for some reason. We need to start putting $8,000 a year aside so that at the end of 15 years, there's going to be $120,000 there. And that's what a good HOA would do to fix the problem. Okay, let's do this. Let's take perimeter fencing. This is very, very common. Okay, imagine you have a $36,000 cost, and you have a useful life of 18 years and you're halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, you're going to have $18,000 in reserves for that component.
Half of it, yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you should be contributing for the remainder of time $2,000.
That's right.
Right? So it's simple math. The reserve study, the board, these are lay people. The board doesn't have to do any of this calculation. This is done for them by experts.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in that report, and the report will be explained to them and what it means. They then need to take their consultant's point of view and then act on that. Nobody's expecting board members that aren't accountants to understand this any more than I understand it or he understands it or you understand it. Mm-hmm. So that's what the experts are for. But what happens, this should be obvious, what happens if an HOA, in our example with the roof, instead of setting aside $8,000 a year, let's say they only set aside $4,000 a year. At the end of the 15 years, what are they going to have? Half.
A massive shortfall.
They're going to have half.
Mm-hmm.
So for that one element, and this is an important term because we're going to use it later, they're going to only be 50% funded as to that one asset.
Yeah.
Okay? 50% funded. Because if they're supposed to hit that $120,000 milestone, if they're supposed to be putting $8,000 a year aside, and they only put $4,000, then that means instead of being 100% funded at the end of that time, they're going to be 50% funded.
Mm-hmm.
That's better than nothing, but it's not good.
No.
Keep that in mind, okay? That's an example, okay? So that reserve study, again, I don't know if I said this before, is not a rainy day fund.
No.
It is a set calculable fund.
Absolutely.
Rainy day means we're not sure what might happen.
Right.
So we should save. That's a good idea. You should always have some savings. Good HOAs, if they have spare cash, should have savings in the operating account. They should save.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about. This isn't rainy day. This is predictable.
Right.
We have this, and this. And this is going to last this long and cost this much. This is going to last this long and cost this much. This is going to last this much. Do the division. We need to set aside X amount per year for this, X amount per year for that. It's completely predictable.
Right.
It might not be accurate at the end because costs have changed and supply.
Yeah.
That's okay. Again, nobody reads the future. Okay. But it is not rainy day. Rainy day is act of God, or we don't know what's going to, emergency.
Undisclosed, yeah.
These are predictable,
Yeah.
fully disclosed costs that will come.
And you have professionals reducing it to a science to the extent possible.
Yeah, to the extent possible, barring unforeseen weather and other things that might increase or decrease the time of wear, which is why you have reevaluations. You have a good, really dry year and no water. Let's say you have no rain for 1 year, and then the stuff that they were anticipating, water damage-wise, might not happen, so they add a year.
Right.
So they recalculate useful, recalculate remaining. All's good, okay? That's great. But just understand, this is not a rainy day fund. These are predictable, 100% certain that these costs are going to come at some point in the future. Probably very close to what the experts have said. Not always. Again, those are predictions, but probably pretty darn close, okay? So you know what reserve funds are. Now tell me what a reserve study is.
Well, a reserve study is essentially a study. It's an inspection. It's coupled, well, I should say it's a combination of a physical inspection of these major components done by a professional, typically a reserve analyst, but this could also include other professionals, such as, in some cases, engineers and architects, perhaps, who will come in and physically inspect these components. And then
When you say that, they're going to look at all the fence and gates.
Right.
They're going to look at the pool equipment.
The pool motor.
They're going to look at the tennis courts.
Exactly.
The balconies.
Possibly even arborists looking at trees, association trees, if you have many of them, if that's warranted. And then that's coupled with the metrics, the numbers portion of it being assigned to it in terms of based on the expectancy.
And they produce a written document, right?
Exactly.
And it's full of columns.
They synthesize all of that, and it's very, well, it's very elaborate. And you and I talked about this before. It can be quite intimidating to many people,
including me.
Yeah, I mean the level of specificity, but that's what it is. I mean they try to reduce it to a science. They try to be transparent and
supposed to. If you have a legitimate company doing it and you have a legitimate board that's not, and I'll talk about an example. I'll talk about when we talk about some of the ways that dishonest boards cheat. I will bring up a real case that I handled. It was one of the first cases I handled when I formed my own firm many years ago. Big association in Orange County. over 400 units and involving a $15 million special assessment.
wow.
When you divide over the 400, it was still a lot of money. And the amount of manipulation that went into the reserve study by the board. And of course, who allowed that to happen? Because ultimately the report is prepared by the professional. But if you have a professional that's cowed by a board, that is when things break down in a way that is very, very untoward, because you can't have that.
Right.
But when you have an objective third-party professional giving an honest opinion,
right.
it's as close to science as you're going to get in a situation like this. And everything he said is exactly right. It is this report that's given. It's full of columns and numbers, okay? It's very intimidating to look at for a person that is not used to seeing things that look like financials. And if you're a numbers phobic person, like I am, you're just gonna say, okay, there's that, and you're gonna put it away and never look at it because it's intimidating. You got to force yourself to look at it. And again, you can ignore 97% of it. There's only 3% I want you to look at, but I'll teach you what to look for, okay? But that's gonna be helpful because it is a very, very critical document. And it's a document you're gonna use as one of the tools you have at your disposal to help figure out whether or not things are kosher or not in your HOA. We'll talk about that probably in part 2, okay? So, reserve study is this physical report coupled with that inspection that predates that report, okay? Now, that report, to be more specific, covers the condition of all those major components, what needs to be repaired, what needs to be replaced, really replaced, that's the main issue, when failure is likely to happen based on what's happened since the last reserve study. Let's say you had 3 years of really, really, really wet weather or something. That's when he might actually recalculate useful life and remaining life downwards. Like, forget 30, this is 25. We got a problem. So everything shifts, right? So it's going to take, we're going to have this replaced sooner rather than later. So you need to up your reserves, your reserve timeline, your reserve, what do you call that?
Projections?
Allocations differently than you have been based on new information, because stuff does change. You know, we live in a dynamic world. Stuff changes, okay? So what's it going to cost? There's been a major restructuring, in the last 3 years since the last reserve study, post-COVID now. You have a pre-COVID reserve study, and then right after COVID, you did a new reserve study, and those costs are going to go way up, so that might have to be readjusted. Hey, guys, you've been putting away money like you're supposed to. You're going to have to increase another $1,500 a month for these components, that kind of thing. All of that will be in that reserve study, okay? And again, he explained this as close to science as you can get. The reason it is because these aren't just guesses. These are based on tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points over time. We've had lots of HOAs in lots of places in California with all of these same assets, and we've been able to see how long things last over the years. So over the last several decades, when you start, especially now with AI, when you can crunch data, you really can get some very good estimates that are pretty darn close to reality. It takes everything into account from weather to, I guess that's, weather and humidity and all that, to the type of materials used, because it'll change depending on if it's this hardwood or a softwood or a medium density wood, whatever it is. All those things are factored into useful life, remaining life, okay, and costs as well, cost of replacement, okay? So we're not talking about just a guess by this expert or that expert are probably going to have almost remarkably similar estimates because they're getting their information from the same reputable sources, okay? And that's another factor is when you have estimates that do not track with any other estimate, that's also a red flag, and we'll talk about that next episode. So let's talk about, we're going to start it today. I'm going to give you a teaser. And then next time, when we pick back up, we're going to get into more detail. But I told you earlier on in this episode, if there was one thing you could get from this, it'd be this number. And it's going to be what I'm just about to talk about, okay? I want you to remember this phrase. And we used it a little earlier, but I'm going to attach it not just to one asset. We talked earlier about percent funded for that one asset. If you only put aside half the money you're supposed to, you're going to have 50% of that asset funded. Now we're going to talk about the HOA as a whole, okay? There is a number that appears in a full reserve study, and it appears on every summary that you're going to get every year by law, mandated that you're supposed to receive this without asking for it, okay? And it comes with the budget and the time when they give you they talk about the policies, the fine policies and the discipline policies, and also all those budget documents you get this reserve summary. And somewhere on there, sometimes it's on the first page, sometimes it's after the cover page from whoever did the reserve study, there'll be something called percent funded. It'll be a number followed by a percent sign. Sometimes it's in bold, okay? That percent funded number is the most important number on that report.
Huge.
And what that means is looking at all of the major components for your HOA as a whole. What percent of all of those assets are being properly reserved for, such that at the end of any one of their particular lives, there'll be money sufficient to pay for its replacement. So remember that roof, $120,000, 25 years. Remember that? That 120. So at the end of 25 years, what percent of that 120,000, but we're not just talking about that one asset, we're talking about all the assets combined, okay? What percent funded is your HOA when it comes to all of its major components? And it could be 65%, it could be 55%, it could be 70%. The higher the percent, the better, okay? We're gonna talk specifically about when you should be happy, when you should start to worry, when you should be scared, and when your HOA is in deep financial ruin. We're gonna go over what the NASS, and I can't remember the SS stands for because I just don't care, but it's a National Association for something.
I used to know, yeah.
Okay, so what the NASS, what they tell you is what their health pattern is. They're way too
conservative.
Yeah, they're way too generous. I discount them by at least 10%. I mean, everything they're saying, they have numbers that are really low that I would never buy in. So I'm going to give you my opinion. Do with that as you like. It's not a legal opinion. It's just my opinion. But it's based on thousands of cases that I've seen come across my desk over the last 3 decades. So that percent funded is basically a percent funded in a ratio or percent, okay? It compares the amount of money. I wrote this little note to myself. It compares the amount of money currently in the reserve account to the amount that ought to be there at the end of any particular asset's given useful life. When the remaining life is zero, in other words, okay? When useful life is used up and remaining life is zero, is there enough money to cover that asset and that asset and that asset and that asset, wherever it happens to fall? That's that percent funded, that ratio number. It's the most important number on there. For example, if your HOA has $450,000 in its reserve account, but the fully funded balance of all those major components, right, is $600,000, then your HOA would be what we would call 75% funded. Now, I'll say that again. If your HOA's reserve, let's say your HOA has one reserve account, and it's got $450,000 in there. That's a lot of money. If you look at every one of your major components for that HOA, your HOA, and it would take $600,000 to fully fund every replacement at this moment, okay, then your HOA is 75% funded. 75%, for those of you who are listening, is a very healthy, wonderful number. If your HOA is at 75%, you can be happy, you can be sitting pretty, you can be confident so far. The chances of you being specially assessed outside the confines of a true emergency that could not have been predicted is low as compared to HOAs that have much lower percent funded. So again, 450 versus 600, you're 75%. Let's take this statute, okay? 5565. Civil Code 5565B1 requires HOAs to disclose to all members that percent funded number. Understand that? Every year in its annual budget, at the same time as that annual budget. If your HOA is giving you its budgetary documents and you don't see that percent funded, your HOA is in violation of the law. That's also a huge red flag. It needs to be there. It's not recommended. It's guaranteed and required. Okay? Now, I remember. National Reserve Study Standards. It's NSSS. It's a National Reserve Study Standards, okay? The National Reserve Study Standards has their published standards as to what they say is good, bad, indifferent, scary. Okay? They say a funding level of 70 to 100% is considered very well funded. I agree. 70% or higher, I agree. Okay? Between 50 and 69%, and this is my opinion now because their numbers are lower. So I was so disgusted by their numbers that I decided I would disregard them. So I'm disclosing now that I'm giving you my numbers because I find the numbers that the NSSS to be very scary. Okay? So I'm going to tell you that if your HOA's percent funded is between 50 and 69%, it's fair. But fair to underfunded. Yeah. So 69%, not bad. Right. It's fair. 68, 67, 66, 65, it becomes less fair, okay? And I don't have it where it becomes underfunded. I'm not quite sure, but I would put that in the 60s, right? Obviously. Once you hit the 50% for you're underfunded for sure. So maybe the draw, and I'm literally making this up. This is just based on my personal beliefs, based on so many different examples I've seen. But anything in the 60s, anything between 65 and 60, or 60 and 65, I would say fair. 65 to 69, good. Anything over 70, very good.
Agreed.
Anything over 80,
fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Right.
You're not going to find a lot of those, if any. I mean, I think mine was at 80 or something. I can't remember, but I've had ones that are in the 70s too. So, but I wouldn't be losing sleep if it was in the 70s. Not at all. I would be okay with fair. Okay? Because even if a special assessment's required, it's not going to be major. It's going to be small.
Right.
Unless, of course, your HOA only has 5 or 6 homes, and then, that's on you. But anything in the 50s is, to me, worrisome, problematic. Anything below 50, to me, is disastrous. Now, NSSS, I think, puts below 35 as disastrous. Let me tell you something.
It's too low, yeah.
If I'm looking for a home, one of the first things I'm asking the seller for is, can I have last year's, all the budget documents? Because I'm going to look for that percent funded. If it's anything in the 50s, I don't care if it's 59 or 51. If it's anywhere in the 50s, I will not buy in that neighborhood unless I'm getting such a good deal that when I buy and close escrow, I've already got tremendous equity. If for some reason it's some sort of fire sale, this person has to sell because their family member has got to move back east quickly to be with family and they don't have time to wait for a good offer, and you swoop in and you happen to be there and you can get it for $100,000 under market value, then yeah, grab it if you're in the 50s.
Right.
But other than that, I'm not buying because there are so many other HOAs that have numbers in the 60s and 70s. There's no reason for you to do that. Okay? To me, anything in the 50s is disqualificatory.
Right.
I don't think that's a word, but it should
disqualifying,
be.
Yeah.
Disqualifying. Anything in the 50s is disqualifying for Michael Kushner.
So severely underfunded that a special assessment down the line is virtually a certainty.
I agree.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, lower than that, you're in disaster zone. I mean, when you're anything below 50, it's problematic, guys. I mean, it's a problem. Okay? I would never buy anything in the 50s, though, ever. I'd buy in the 60s depending, and I wouldn't worry if it was in the 70s. It would have to be in the mid to high 60s, and I'd have to get a good deal. For me, okay, in the mood I'm in right now, yes, but maybe next week I might say, nope, it has to be 70. I might change my mind, but that's what we're talking, guys. High 60s, 70s, I'd be okay. High 60s, maybe, if it's a good deal, okay? Low 60s, mid 60s, I wouldn't lose sleep, but I'd pay attention. But anything below that, you could be losing sleep, okay? Now, if your HOA, therefore, is 40% funded, if you found out your HOA was 40% funded, would you be concerned?
100%. I mean, that aggregate number ratio is massive.
Yeah, because it means that they don't even have, they're not even at half.
No.
They have less than half that they need to replace major, not little components, major components.
And to me, one brief step beyond that, that's emblematic of just substandard performance by board or multiple boards back to back. And that in itself is a red flag. I mean, you guys are not adequately funding these reserves, and that's just...
And we're going to talk about why that happens. And some of those explanations, I'm going to give air quotes.
Yeah.
Some of those explanations are terrible because they don't compute.
Yeah.
They're penny wise and pound foolish. They're short-sighted. Pick any adage you want. It doesn't compute. We're going to get to that next time, okay? In fact, I think this is a good time to cut bait.
Okay.
I think we'll end part 1 here. When we pick up in part 2, we're going to talk about what actually happens when reserves are underfunded. What does it mean? What's it result in? Okay, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how bad HOAs manipulate reserves and that percent funded ultimately because they know they have to give you that number. They know they have to give it to you. So what do they do to make that number artificially go up? Because up is better. There are lots of creative ways that they do it. It's dishonest. It's illegal. And if it's done with intent, it is absolutely fraud. We're also going to cover how to spot. What can you do to help you spot reserve funding red flags? So I'm not only going to describe the red flags, I'm going to tell you how to look for them, how to spot them, okay? Then, to cap it off, I'm going to tell you what to do if your HOA has a reserve fund problem and is not being transparent about it. They're hiding it, either by doing some of the nefarious, fraudulent things we're going to talk about, or out of sheer ineptitude, in which case it wouldn't be intentional. If it was out of sheer ineptitude, it would just be pure negligence.
Right.
And depending on how bad the negligence is, it could be a fiduciary breach.
Right.
Okay? But a lot of the time, as in the big case I was hinting at, and remind me to talk about this next time.
Okay.
This HOA in South Orange County, that was nefarious because it was absolutely intentional. It was done by two directors who had been on the board, each of them for more than 20 years without a break.
Oh, wow.
That is too long. If you guys have people on your board that have served for more than 10 years, in my opinion, they need to go out to pasture and let other people come in. Nobody should be serving that long. I don't care. Nobody. It's just bad. Okay? It breeds contentment. It breeds a entitlement that I think is wrong. Okay? So we're going to end it today on part one. I hope that you've learned a little something today, at least for that percent funded. And next time is going to be chock full of information to actually help you solve the problem if you spot one. So if you liked today's episode, please hit the like button. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel, HOA Hell. If you'd like to leave a comment, especially about today's episode, we would love to hear from you. And until next time, have a wonderful